Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap up. I am so happy to be back because I was so busy with life things, travel, and all of that, and I decided I just couldn't film a video in the past couple of weeks. But I'm very excited to be back. So this is why this April wrap up is long overdue. But I'm very excited to be back, and I have the one thing I really like about travel is that it just really inspires me with new ideas. And so I came back and I wrote down a bunch of things for video ideas. So I'm just really excited about the upcoming videos. So there's that. I'm gonna try to post more in the community tab too to just update you on when I'm going to be missing uploads. But I just couldn't do it the past few weeks. So sorry about that, but I am going to be pretty consistent from now on until otherwise said. I don't want to say that because then that means that something's going to happen, but I really want to be consistent with the YouTube uploads for at least a couple of months because then I can tell myself I can buy a camera. So that's the thing. Long ramble aside, May is turning out to be a really good reading month. So I'm really excited to talk about those books. But today I'm just going to be talking about the books that I read in April. So excuse me if I'm a little bit rusty because I have not read these books in a while, and but we'll see. We'll make do. So let's start off just pretty simple, just like the DNFs all the way over to my favorite books of the month. And I think I read a total of, I think not including short stories and did not finishes, I read about three books this month, so a little bit on the shorter side. They were really good ones. So let's talk about the DNFs first. The first book I DNF'd was The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. This is an OG, like 2010s, I think, yeah, 2010s, like young adult fantasy book that was all the rage back then. I thought that this would be just like an easy audiobook for me to do while I played video games, but I just couldn't do it. The world building was so lackluster, so lackluster. I just might have just, I could have just put out a cardboard cutout of generic medieval fantasy. Like literally the only thing she really described was uh, the trees and like the river, right? And that could literally be anywhere. And she'd called the evil people barbarians, and they had literally no names, which I think might be on purpose, but I still was so pissed off about that. Like there was literally nothing for me to hold on to, and which is technically fine. Maybe I can overlook that, but my issue is that once she met the two love interests, they both sounded the same to me, and I just didn't care from that. I just didn't care. So let me back up a little bit here. This book is The Kiss of Deception is a young adult fantasy novel about this princess who is arranged to be married to a neighboring kingdom because they need to keep up relations essentially, and she is purported to have a magical powers, which she also admits that she doesn't have, which will probably be an issue later on. So she ends up running away with her lady's maid, and they end up in a neighboring town, and she starts working as a barmaid at the inn that they stop at, and there she meets two guys who essentially are out to find her. So one is an assassin, and the other one is the prince from the neighboring kingdom. You, as the reader, don't know who is who until it is revealed to you. But that's kind of like part of the fun of reading the novels to figure out who's who. Unfortunately, it was not fun for me because they both sounded the same, and therefore I just did not care. So that was kind of a disappointment to me. I was expecting something fun and lighthearted. And I thought that I lowered my expectations enough, but clearly I did not. So that was a DNF for me. And I think that's going to be it for me and Mary E. Pearson as an author, because I just cannot get into her books. And frankly, I find the world building to be so lackluster. And in this case, so are the characters. The next book that I DNF'd was such a disappointment. I was so disappointed. It was Leviathan Wakes by James S. A. Corey. This one is an adult science fiction novel about intergalactic politics, essentially. So this takes place in the far future where we have basically colonized the entire solar system, and there are tensions being brewed between Mars and this in between asteroid belt called the Belt, and eventually Earth, I think. So there's simmering tensions between these three space entities, and it basically kind of boils over, and what I think is going to happen is probably war, right? So we're following two main characters, and they alternate perspectives. One is named Holden, and the other one is I already forgot his name, but Holden is the captain of a ship that was being targeted, and he's trying to find out why. And the other one a detective on the is a detective on the belt, and he's trying to figure out a missing persons case, which could be tied to basically a larger conspiracy in these simmering tensions. So what a great plot, right? What a great setup. Unfortunately, it just felt like a C-rated action movie to me, right? You've got two men who really I cannot really interchange between them at this point. Maybe Holden's a little bit more looser than the detective, but Holden, they both are stereotype caricatures that you see in action movies, right? They're very like stoic, one-liner, kind of quippy main characters, usually men, who just don't really have a personality and character, and I was hoping that that would change, and we would get that like in the end of the book, but the book just was just full of cringy dialogue and characters that just could not pull the story along. Now, the world building was really interesting, right? And I think this was shortlisted for the Hugo Award one year or something like that. But I personally thought that the world building was the only saving grace of this book. But unfortunately, the world building is just not enough for me to carry a book. So need more. And so I had to stop this book, which I was so sad about, because this is like an 8 book series that I really wanted to sink my teeth into, and the world building was so great. I love like that space opera feel to it, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I was looking up on Reddit and things like that, and then people said that you could start with the second book, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you feel like I should continue on with the series and if it is worth it. But as of now, it's just not, which is really unfortunate and really sad. I'm still looking for my type of space opera. So we're done with the DNFs. The next book I'm gonna be talking about, I still have not yet to finish, and I don't know if I will ever finish, obviously cover to cover, but it is select stories from the Old Testament in the Bible. um, I am not religious personally. However, the Bible is just an important piece of text, just because I wanted to know more about literary references that I've read in in literature. And this actually came about because I was reading a book that I will talk about later on in this video, that I was buddy reading with my friend, and she kind of understood a lot of the religious references because she is Catholic, but I wasn't, and I didn't understand it, and I really wanted to. Just from reading select stories of the Old Testament, I really felt like I could understand a lot of these references just in daily life too, just human choices and human history in general. So I thought that was pretty cool. I do think that it's really going to help me with my understanding of other classics that I want to read later on this year, or reread, especially East of Eden. So that one is kind of like an ongoing piece of work that I'm going to be reading throughout the year because I cannot read it all in one sitting. Um, but I think that it has helped me really understand literary references that I read. So we're done with books that I've DNF'd and books I haven't finished. So we're just gonna go on to worst to best. And the worst one that I read so far this month is actually a novelette, and it's The Kaiju Agonistes by Scott Lynch. Now, it's a little bit unfair to put this on the worst piece of work that I read this month, just because it's hard for me to rate short stories and novelettes and short pieces of literature really highly, just because I'm like a really longer book girl, and I like having those longer books to sink into, and it's just really hard for me to rate shorter media the same way. But nevertheless, I actually wanted to read this book because it ended up on the Hugo Award list for 2026. And Scott Lynch, if you don't know, is the author of one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, and that is the Lies of Locke Lamora. This is the new paperback edition, which I think is really stunning, and I want to collect all of them in this cover. This is one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, if not my favorite, although Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty comes really close. So I have to do a reread and see, but yeah, I read this such a long time ago, back when I was in high school or college, and yeah, it's stuck with me ever since. And I am still waiting with bated breath for the fourth book. It's been, I think, at least like 10 years since he continued writing in this book, and I think he's still working on it, thankfully. I don't know what I would do without the continuation of this series, and if it just ended in the third book. So if you haven't already, you should really check out The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. But he did write a novelette that ended up on the Hugo Award shortlist for this year, and it's called The Kaiju Agonistes. This is essentially about, it's set during the 1950s, I think. And it's essentially what would happen. How would the world react if a Loch Ness type monster appeared into the world? And this Loch Ness type monster essentially is put onto Earth for a very specific reason, which I will not talk about. But historically, it actually follows different presidents that we know and how they would react to this monster. And it's just kind of a meditation on politics and how we treat foreigners who come into our soils. Um, and with Scott Lynch's really economical, but almost like almost verbose, but not really, sense of writing, he just has a way with words. It's kind of insane. And I almost enjoy his wordplay as much as like the plot and the world building. The way that I also grade novelettes is if I have a sense that there has been there's stories that could be told before this time period and stories that could be told after. Like, it feels like the story is really lived in. And that is something that Scott Lynch is just really good at doing. He's really good at not info dumping at all, really. And I think he's one of the very few authors who can do it. And you really can sink yourself into the story and you're really placed into that story. And the same way was with Life of Locklemoor. There is no real, like, really heavy, from what I remember, heavy exposition and paragraphs of explaining the world building. He just kind of drops you in there. And this is kind of like dense world building too. So this short story is not quite as dense as that, and you can really pick that up really fast. But he still does a really good job, I think. And so I will read anything that he puts out. I'm just a really big Scott Lynch fan, and I just love his writing a lot. I think he's really talented. So would recommend the read. It's pretty short. And then I read a short story from the same list. This one is In My Country by Thomas Ha. This one is a different type of science fiction. This one is dystopian science fiction, and Thomas Ha proves that dystopians can come really in any sort of length. I honestly think that it's kind of a subgenre of science fiction that can work well in shorter form, because you can be just really sparse with it. You don't have to have a lot of world building in a dystopian, really, and you can have as much as you want. So this one is really interesting. I think you should honestly go into the plot blind, but it is dystopian, and it's a story about how ambiguity is not allowed in any sort of thinking of the people and of any media that is being put out in this world, which I personally thought was really interesting, because, usually when, for example, in a book, when you criticize the government, right, that is a big no-no in dystopian fiction. You're not allowed to critically think. In this story, you still can't critically think, but you can criticize the government. You could criticize anything you want as long as you're not ambiguous about it or nuanced about it, which honestly I thought was so smart and so clever, because in this day and age, right, critical thinking is just decreasing and decreasing, and it's not being really promoted, or something that is general or something that is generally a good quality that we think of. But the story really tells us that critical thinking is really important and nuance is really important. Um, so, highly recommend. Again, it's a really short story. You could breeze by through it in like 20 minutes. I really recommend it. Now let's move on to the books that I read. So the first one, I just needed something fun after every like the hard stuff that I've been reading. So I read This Earl of Mine by Kate Bateman. This is a historical romance novel about a woman who who tries to marry a prisoner, because this prisoner is supposed to be executed, and when he is executed, she can just keep her company that she inherited from her dad, and she really likes taking over this business, and she really taking care of the people that she is in charge of, and so again, during this time period, if she marries, then all of that decision making would go to her husband. So, but if she is a widow, right, she can continue making these decisions. So if she decides to just marry a prisoner, he'll be executed, and that will be that. However, this prisoner that she marries ends up being actually an investigator into this investigator into Napoleon and all of that. That's a separate story. But he ends up coming back into her life, I think, like, I don't know, like a year later, and then they kind of hit it off, and it kind of goes from there. This one is not as good as my all-time favorite, Beast of Bestwick, but I don't know if anything will be. I did really enjoy the story. I thought it was fun. It was a little melodramatic at times with a really like dramatic third act, but I did really like the banter between the two main characters, and it was really cool that she owned a business. If you like murder mysteries and historical romance in one, which I hadn't really read before, then you might like this one. It also has a bunch of like sillier characters on the side, like her sister, which I think sometimes really clashed with the heavier topics of the story. but I think overall it was okay. So this one is not a bad one, not a great one, but something that was light and entertaining, which is something that I just needed. We're getting back into our last two books. Next two are my two favorite books of the month, and I'm really excited to talk about them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This one was the entire reason why I wanted to start reading the Bible, was because there are a lot of biblical references in this book, and I think your knowledge would be a lot richer if you did know of the references to the Bible. But essentially, this book is about a man who murders someone, and it's kind of like a mystery, right? And after he murders someone, people try to figure out what's going on. But mostly, it's this book is mostly a meditation on a lot of philosophical topics that Dostoevsky likes to talk about. He loves to talk about religion. He likes to talk about nihilism. He likes to talk about has social commentary about suffering and class, rich versus poor. And I tap so much of this book. He goes on a lot of tangents in this book, and you could tell that these characters are almost vessels for his ideas, which I was a little bit worried about, but at the same time, these characters are fully characters in their own right. They mostly serve as vessels for his topics that he likes to talk about, but you still will not forget these characters. They are very nuanced and complex, and I honestly thought it's so fascinating how much compassion and sincerity Dostoevsky has just for humankind in general. Um, because there's a lot of people in this book who do not very great things and very bad things, in fact. Um, but he's able to write it so that you feel compassion and sympathy for even like the worst character. And it really makes you question your idea of justice and what punishment should be for a crime. That's something that I really liked in this book. I do have like a reading blog on my channel of talking a little bit more about this book. But I think this book is a masterpiece for a reason. It has really stood the test of time. And honestly, I still learn something new about it. And just thinking about how humanity is all the same, even from 1800s Russia. So there's so much I could talk about in this book, and I think I might do like a video where I talk about all of Dostoevsky's books because this book made me really want to read more of them. So, Crime and Punishment, wonderful book. I think I gave it like a 4.5 stars just because I think the middle kind of dragged out a little bit, and the investigator was talking way too long about how he was going to find out who the murderer was. Um, but to me, it really was a moot point because, yo, we already know who committed the murder. And then the last book I read was also a short novelette. This is Small Boat by Vincent Delecroix. This was translated from the French by Helen Stevenson, and this was on the International Booker Prize back in 2025. Um, After I read this book, I had to get a physical copy of my own, and I actually did do like a whole video analysis of uh, what some of the themes that he talks about in this book. So if you want, I'm really proud of that video, so go ahead and check it out. But this one is quite a timely piece, actually. This one is about a woman who's a sea traffic controller, and then one day a boat of migrants calls her for help. Now, she punts them basically onto uh, British authorities because, her reasoning was that they're on British territory now, so they should basically they should be able to take care of these migrants. Well, these migrants ended up dying, and it's all about the consequences of that. So this is a fictionalized account of a real life story. So there was a migrant boat, and these people, these migrants, actually make this journey from French to British waters. Still, but the perspective of the sea traffic controller is fictionalized, and this whole story follows the her response to the accusations that she has put forth. So it's basically an interrogation between her and the police officer that is interrogating her. I really, really enjoyed this book. And so let me backtrack a little bit. So when I was listening to an interview with the author and Dua Lipa, by the way, goals. I love her book club so much, and honestly, that'd be my dream to interview authors like that. But point aside, in that interview, she talks to him about why put the sea traffic controller as the main character focus in this book. And he said it's because, the sea traffic controller is all of us, is us. He tries to write the character in a very empathetic way, despite her having a lot of inflammatory remarks and inflammatory uh, opinions about the migrants, right? And so I personally think that some of the point is missed in this book in just general discourse. And I think we're inclined to have a sort of visceral reaction to the sea traffic controller and say that she's an evil person, she didn't save them, and she has horrible ideas about migrants and things like that. But if you look at my video too, and if you look deeper into the what he's trying to write, he has a lot of empathy for this controller, and he has the author wants us to take a look at ourselves and how we would react. Would we react any differently? We would like to think so, right? But we are not in this position, and we are not in the position of so many people who have to make these really tough decisions day in and day out. And I talk about that in my video, the cost of empathy and how empathy plays a role, or when it maybe goes too far, when empathy can go too far in this book. And there's so much to unpack here in this small book, and he writes it so effectively, but it just packs a punch. And I think he just writes it so well. And I think it's from a perspective that we don't really see often a lot. And it really makes us see the situation in a different light, which I always appreciate from books. And that's what I like. So I gave this one also like a 4.5 stars. Those are the books that I read in April. I've read a lot more in May, and I cannot wait to talk about the books that I read in May. But again, the highlights of April were definitely Small Boat and Crime and Punishment, and I just cannot wait to read more of the International Booker Prize and more Dostoevsky. So that is it for me for the month of April, and I will see you back in my next video. Bye.